The commercial airliner hummed through 37,000 feet of darkness, its passengers lost in the liminal space between destinations. Most slept fitfully in cramped seats, unaware that history was quietly unfolding 6 rows from the emergency exit. Commander Lydia, Revenant Thorn, had learned to sleep anywhere: aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, forward operating bases in Afghanistan, even the cockpit of her FA-18 Super Hornet during extended CAPs over hostile territory. But tonight, something felt different. She stirred as the cabin's familiar vibrations shifted almost imperceptibly. 23 years of military service had honed her situational awareness to an art form. The flight attendants had stopped their usual circuits. The ambient lighting seemed deliberately dimmed. Even in her half-conscious state, Thorne's mind cataloged these anomalies with the precision that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments. What truly awakened her wasn't sound, it was the absence of it. The soft conversations, restless shifting, even the typical engine harmonics had somehow muted to an unnatural stillness. She opened her eyes slowly, maintaining the steady breathing pattern of sleep while her peripheral vision swept the cabin. That's when she saw them. 6 figures moving with the fluid precision that only comes from years of specialized training. Navy SEALs, she realized immediately, recognizing the controlled movements and tactical spacing even in civilian clothes. They weren't passengers, at least, not originally. Their positions formed a textbook containment pattern, with the primary subject clearly being the unremarkable woman in row 6, seat C. Sorry. The lead operative, a weathered man with intelligent eyes and salt and pepper stubble, paused 3 feet from her seat. His hand rested casually near his jacket, but Thorne caught the telltale bulge of a concealed sidearm. More concerning was the small device in his left palm, some kind of scanner or detection equipment, its LED display casting a faint blue glow. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "we need you to come with us." The other passengers remained oblivious, most still sleeping, a few absorbed in their devices with noise-canceling headphones. The flight crew had mysteriously vanished from the main cabin. Whatever was happening had been planned with meticulous precision, executed with the kind of operational security that suggested national-level authorization. Thorne's mind raced through possibilities. Her last mission had been classified beyond her own clearance level. The target designation, the payload, even the flight recorder data, all sealed under congressional oversight. She'd been debriefed, polygraphed, and officially reassigned to a desk job at Pensacola. Yet here she was, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, surrounded by America's most elite warriors who somehow knew exactly where to find her. The scanner in the operative's hand beeped twice, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something approaching reverence. He lowered the device slowly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that spoke volumes about what he'd just confirmed. "Commander Thorne," he said, and the title carried weight that her civilian clothes couldn't disguise. "We've been looking for you." The woman codenamed Revenant sat up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. After 6 months of mandatory psychological leave, she'd almost convinced herself that her war was over. The nightmares had begun to fade. The hypervigilance had softened into something resembling normal civilian awareness. She'd been sleeping lightly because that's what survivors do, not because she expected her past to manifest at 37,000 feet. But looking at these men, seeing the respect and urgency in their eyes, Thorne understood that some wars never truly end. They just find new battlefields. The lead operative held out a tablet, its screen displaying satellite imagery that made her blood run cold. She recognized the terrain immediately, the same coordinates where everything had gone wrong 8 months ago, where a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into something that required the highest levels of government deniability. "What's the situation?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had stared death in the face and negotiated favorable terms. The operative's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we have a code black scenario developing in the South China Sea. Assets are compromised, extraction impossible through conventional means. The Pentagon has authorized Operation Lazarus under your specific mission parameters." Thorne felt something shift in her chest, not fear, but recognition. Lazarus. She'd heard whispers of contingency protocols designed for scenarios too catastrophic for normal military response. Plans that required pilots with specific skill sets, specific psychological profiles, and above all, specific security clearances that transcended traditional command structures. She looked around the cabin one final time, noting how the other passengers continued their mundane journeys, unaware that their flight had become an impromptu briefing room for what might be the most important mission of the 21st century. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been grounded for asking too many questions about a mission that officially never happened. Now they were literally pulling her out of civilian life because apparently, some questions could only be answered at Mach 2.5, while threading the needle between international incidents and global catastrophe. "Time frame?" she asked. "Wheels up in 4 hours, ma'am. Carrier strike group is already repositioning." The operative paused, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his expression. "Commander, you should know, this isn't just about your flight skills. What happened during Operation Ghost Walker? We need someone who understands the technology." Ghost Walker. The name hit her like a physical blow, dragging her back to a cockpit filled with warning lights and impossible readings, to skis that behaved in ways that defied every law of physics she'd been taught. She'd filed her report, answered the questions, and been politely but firmly instructed to forget everything she'd seen. The aircraft she'd been flying that day had been classified above her clearance level. Even her own mission logs had been sealed under executive privilege. But forgetting and understanding were different things entirely. In the months since, she'd done her own research, following breadcrumbs through declassified papers and academic journals, slowly piecing together a picture that terrified her more than enemy missiles ever had. If they needed her knowledge of that technology, it meant someone else had figured it out too. And if someone else was using it, then the world was about to become a much more dangerous place. "I'll need full disclosure this time," she said, meeting the operative's eyes with the steady gaze that had earned her respect in squadrons across 3 services. "No compartmentalized briefings, no need-to-know restrictions. If I'm flying into whatever this is, I need to understand exactly what I'm up against." The operative nodded, but she could see the conflict in his expression. Men like him were trained to follow orders, not to question the wisdom of those orders or to make promises about transparency that might conflict with national security protocols. Still, something in her tone, perhaps the quiet authority that came from having faced the impossible and lived to file a report about it, seemed to convince him that normal procedures wouldn't be sufficient. "Ma'am, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this aircraft," he said, glancing toward his team members who had moved to form a wider perimeter, ensuring their conversation remained private. 3 days ago, a Chinese research vessel was detected in international waters approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of Taiwan. Initially classified as a routine scientific expedition, until our satellites detected energy signatures consistent with the technology you encountered during Ghost Walker. Thorne's blood chilled. The technology from that mission, whatever it had been, was unlike anything in the conventional military arsenal. During Ghost Walker, her aircraft's instruments had registered impossible readings, gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic fields that shouldn't exist, and most disturbing of all, brief moments where her radar had detected objects that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. She'd initially assumed it was experimental stealth technology, some next-generation advancement in radar evasion. But the post-mission analysis had suggested something far more revolutionary and dangerous. The brief glimpses she'd been allowed into the classified research, indicated that someone had figured out how to manipulate spacetime itself, creating localized distortions that could render conventional military doctrine obsolete overnight. "How many people know about this?" she asked. "Fewer than 20 worldwide, ma'am. The technology is considered so sensitive that even acknowledging its existence requires presidential authorization." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of someone sharing information that could reshape global power balances. "Commander, we believe the Chinese have not only reverse-engineered the technology but potentially improved upon it. Early intelligence suggests they're preparing for a demonstration that could fundamentally alter the strategic balance in the Pacific." The implications hit her immediately. If China had mastered space-time manipulation technology, traditional military advantages became meaningless. Aircraft carriers could be rendered useless if enemy weapons could bypass normal physics. Nuclear deterrence lost its foundation if delivery systems could be intercepted by distorting space itself. The entire architecture of modern warfare would collapse overnight, leaving only those who controlled the new physics as the arbiters of global power. "What's the mission profile?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would involve flying deeper into danger than any pilot should reasonably accept. The woman who had once been grounded for asking inconvenient questions about impossible technology found herself being recruited for a mission that would require her to confront that technology head-on. The irony was almost amusing, if it weren't potentially the prelude to a new kind of warfare that could make conventional conflicts look like children's games. "We need you to conduct reconnaissance and, if necessary, neutralize the threat before it can be fully deployed," the operative said. "Your experience with the technology makes you uniquely qualified to identify its capabilities and limitations. More importantly, you're one of the few pilots who has encountered it and maintained both aircraft control and mission effectiveness." Thorne nodded slowly, understanding now why they had pulled her from civilian life with such urgency. It wasn't just about her skills as a pilot, though those were considerable. It was about her unique experience with technology that defied conventional understanding, and more importantly, her psychological profile that had allowed her to function effectively even when confronted with phenomena that challenged her fundamental understanding of reality. "Timeline for deployment?" she asked. "Carrier Nimitz is currently positioned 400 nautical miles southeast of Okinawa. You'll be transported there via military aircraft within the next 6 hours, briefed en route, and expected to launch your first reconnaissance sortie at dawn Pacific time." The operative's expression grew more serious. "Commander, I need to be clear about one thing. This mission exists outside normal command structures. Success or failure, official records will show you were never involved. If something goes wrong, there will be no rescue operation, no prisoner exchange negotiations, no diplomatic acknowledgement of your presence in the area." The terms were stark but not unexpected. Missions involving experimental or highly classified technology always came with plausible deniability clauses that left individual operators exposed to consequences that governments couldn't officially acknowledge. Still, the weight of the implications settled on her shoulders like familiar flight gear, heavy with responsibility but somehow comforting in its familiarity. "Understood," she said simply. "What aircraft am I flying?" The question brought the first smile she'd seen from the operative, though it carried more irony than humor. "That's where this gets interesting, ma'am. You'll be flying a modified FA-18 Super Hornet designated Spectre 7. The modifications include some of the same technology you encountered during Ghost Walker, but configured for active use rather than passive observation." The words sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the aircraft's air conditioning system. During Ghost Walker, she had been an observer, documenting phenomena she couldn't understand while trying to maintain control of conventional aircraft systems. Now they were asking her to become an active participant, to wield technology that she had barely survived encountering as a passive observer. But even as the magnitude of the challenge settled into her mind, Thorne felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that transcended personal fear or professional obligation. Whatever was happening in the South China Sea represented a potential turning point in human history. If this technology fell into the wrong hands or was used irresponsibly, the consequences could reshape civilization itself. The lead operative was watching her carefully, obviously aware that he was asking her to volunteer for what might be a suicide mission disguised as a reconnaissance flight. But he also seemed to understand that pilots like Thorne didn't make decisions based on personal safety calculations. They made decisions based on mission necessity and their unique ability to contribute to outcomes that mattered. "I need one thing," she said finally. "Name it, ma'am. If this goes wrong, if I don't come back, I want my flight data recovered and analyzed. Whatever I encounter out there, whatever I learn about this technology, it needs to be preserved and studied. Future pilots shouldn't have to figure this out from scratch if there are future pilots who need to understand it." The operative nodded, and she could see genuine respect in his expression. "That's already been arranged, Commander. Your aircraft will be equipped with redundant recording systems, and data will be transmitted in real time to secure analysis centers. Your observations and insights will be preserved regardless of mission outcome." It was a small comfort, but an important one. Military pilots were trained to accept mission risks that civilian minds couldn't process, but they were also trained to ensure that their sacrifice contributed to something larger than individual survival. If her experience with this impossible technology could help others understand and counter it, then even mission failure could serve strategic purposes. "Then I'm in," she said, and the words felt like stepping through a door that couldn't be reopened. The operative nodded and gestured to his team. Within moments, they had created a discreet corridor toward the aircraft's front galley, where she noticed for the first time that the flight crew was standing at attention. Not the casual alertness of commercial aviation professionals, but the precise bearing of military personnel in the presence of a superior officer. As they moved through the cabin, Thorne caught glimpses of other passengers beginning to stir, their unconscious minds registering the subtle changes in cabin atmosphere and crew behavior. But their awareness came too late to process what they were witnessing: the quiet recruitment of a warrior who had been sleeping lightly in row 6, dreaming civilian dreams about a war she thought had ended. The forward galley had been transformed into an impromptu briefing room, complete with secure communication equipment and tactical displays that had definitely not been part of the aircraft's original configuration. As the door closed behind them, sealing out the normal world of commercial aviation, Thorne found herself standing in a space that existed between her civilian present and her military future. "Commander," the operative said, extending a tablet loaded with preliminary intelligence reports, "welcome back to active duty." She accepted the device, feeling its weight as something more than just technology. It was the weight of renewed purpose, of specialized knowledge being called upon to confront unprecedented challenges. The screen displayed satellite imagery of the South China Sea, marked with coordinates that made her pulse quicken with recognition and anticipation. The war she had thought was over had simply been waiting for the right battlefield. And somehow, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, surrounded by America's most elite warriors, Commander Lydia Revenant Thorne understood that her most important mission was just beginning. The preliminary intelligence briefing revealed details that transformed her understanding of the current crisis from serious to potentially catastrophic. The Chinese research vessel wasn't conducting experiments. It was preparing for operational deployment of technology that could render traditional naval power projection obsolete. Satellite imagery showed energy patterns consistent with successful spacetime manipulation on a scale that dwarfed anything she had witnessed during Ghost Walker. More disturbing were the tactical implications outlined in the classified analysis. If the Chinese had achieved stable control over gravitational distortion fields, they could create defensive barriers that conventional weapons couldn't penetrate while simultaneously launching attacks that bypassed traditional defensive systems. The strategic balance that had maintained relative peace in the Pacific for decades could collapse within hours of a successful demonstration. Intelligence estimates give us a window of approximately 36 hours before the technology reaches full operational status, the operative explained, pointing to specific markers on the tactical display. After that point, conventional military response becomes impossible. We would be facing an adversary with the ability to manipulate physical laws that our weapons and strategies depend upon. Thorne studied the intelligence reports with the focused intensity that had made her legendary among reconnaissance pilots. The data patterns were familiar from her Ghost Walker experience, but the scale and sophistication were exponentially greater. Whatever breakthrough the Chinese had achieved went far beyond reverse engineering captured technology. They had clearly solved fundamental problems that American researchers were still struggling to understand. "What's our technological counter?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would involve flying into situations that pushed the boundaries of both physics and human endurance. The operative's expression grew more serious, if that was possible. "That's where your unique experience becomes crucial, Commander. The modifications to Spectre 7 include active countermeasures based on data from your Ghost Walker mission. But the technology is still experimental, and we don't fully understand its interaction with the Chinese systems." He paused, and she could see him weighing how much classified information to reveal even in this secure environment. "The truth is, ma'am, we're asking you to fly into a situation where our understanding of physics might not apply, using technology we don't fully control, against adversaries who may have achieved capabilities that exceed our theoretical models." It was a remarkably honest assessment of what amounted to a potentially suicidal mission. But honesty was something Thorne had learned to value above false reassurance, especially when facing challenges that required adapting to circumstances that couldn't be fully predicted or prepared for. "Backup plans?" she asked. "If reconnaissance confirms that Chinese capabilities exceed our countermeasures, you have authorization to implement Protocol Omega," he said quietly. "Complete system neutralization through any means necessary, with full understanding that extraction may not be possible." Protocol Omega. Even the designation carried ominous implications that went far beyond typical military engagement rules. She had heard whispers of such authorizations during the darkest periods of the War on Terror, situations where individual operators were given carte blanche to prevent catastrophic outcomes regardless of personal consequences or diplomatic ramifications. Rules of engagement. "Commander, you have presidential authorization to use any means necessary to prevent the deployment of this technology against American interests. That includes conventional weapons, experimental countermeasures, and if necessary, direct action against research personnel who might possess critical knowledge." The words hung in the secure galley like a challenge to everything she thought she understood about military ethics and legal warfare. But she also understood that technology capable of manipulating spacetime itself transcended normal considerations of proportional response and collateral damage. If such capabilities fell under hostile control, the consequences could make traditional warfare look like diplomatic negotiation. "I understand," she said simply, though understanding and accepting were different psychological processes that would require careful management over the coming hours. The operative nodded and activated another display, this one showing detailed specifications for the Spectre 7 aircraft that would be her platform for confronting technology that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality itself. The modifications were extensive and clearly represented years of classified research based on phenomena that officially didn't exist. "Ma'am, there's one more thing you need to know," he said, and his tone carried implications that made even the previous revelations seem like routine briefing material. The technology you encountered during Ghost Walker, we believe it originated from the same source as the Chinese system. Someone has been sharing information across traditional security boundaries, and we don't know who or why. The implications of that statement reverberated through her understanding of both missions like seismic shocks. If the technology had a common source, then both American and Chinese forces were essentially using variations of the same revolutionary physics. The confrontation she was being asked to fly into might not be between nations, but between different applications of fundamentally similar capabilities. More disturbing was the suggestion that information was being shared outside normal intelligence channels. That meant either a security breach of unprecedented scope or cooperation between powers that should be adversaries. Either possibility suggested that the real situation in the South China Sea was far more complex and dangerous than traditional military planning could address. "Suspected source?" she asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "That's classified above both our pay grades, Commander. But intelligence suggests that neither American nor Chinese forces represent the original developers of this technology. We may be dealing with capabilities that originated from sources outside traditional national research programs." The words carried implications that pushed the boundaries of her ability to process classified information, without losing focus on immediate mission requirements. If the technology came from non-governmental sources, then the entire framework of national security planning became questionable. Military strategies based on predictable adversaries and conventional capabilities would be useless against organizations or entities that operated outside recognized command structures. But speculation about ultimate sources would have to wait until after she had confronted the immediate tactical challenge of flying reconnaissance missions against technology that could manipulate reality itself. Whatever larger forces were at work, her mission remained clear: gather intelligence, assess capabilities, and if necessary, prevent deployment through any means available. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering tactical details that transformed abstract intelligence into concrete mission parameters. Flight paths, communication protocols, emergency procedures, and contingency plans that ranged from optimistic success to catastrophic failure. By the time they finished, Thorne felt as prepared as anyone could be for flying into a situation where preparation itself might be an obsolete concept. "Transport aircraft will rendezvous with this flight in 30 minutes, Commander," the operative said as he secured the classified materials. "From there, you'll have approximately 4 hours of flight time to the carrier for final briefings and equipment familiarization." She nodded, understanding that her civilian interlude was definitively ending. Whatever happened in the South China Sea, whatever she learned about technology that challenged human understanding of physics, whatever choices she had to make about Protocol Omega, all of it began with walking off this commercial airliner as a passenger and boarding a military aircraft as an operator with authorization to potentially reshape global power balances. "One last question," she said. "My call sign, Revenant. How did that end up in the mission files?" The operative's expression shifted to something approaching a smile, though it carried more respect than humor. "Ma'am, that wasn't assigned by personnel. Your squadron mates started calling you that after Ghost Walker, when you brought back an aircraft and intelligence that everyone assumed was lost. Command decided it was appropriate for someone who had a habit of returning from missions that should have been impossible to survive. Revenant, someone who returns from the dead. It was a designation that carried weight beyond normal military humor, suggesting that her reputation for surviving impossible circumstances had become part of her official identity. But as she prepared to walk into what might be the most dangerous mission of her career, Thorne wondered if even someone known for defying death could come back from a confrontation with technology that operated outside the physical laws that made survival possible in the first place. The commercial airliner continued its journey through the Atlantic night, carrying passengers who would wake up tomorrow morning unaware that they had shared their flight with a warrior being recruited for a mission that could determine whether tomorrow morning would arrive under the same physical laws that had governed yesterday. In row 6, seat C, an empty space marked where Commander Lydia Revenant Thorne had been sleeping lightly, until Navy SEALs had encircled her seat, frozen with recognition of someone whose expertise had become humanity's best hope for confronting the impossible.